There are some basic terms that are essential to know before you start adding type into your Photoshop documents. With 260,000 plus typefaces out there, you need to make decisions based on many different factors. Kerning, leading, lorem ipsum, and type fonts are some terms that we're going to go over really quick before we get into the Photoshop. Font and typeface are two words that are often used interchangeably, but they are different. A typeface is a family of fonts. Arial, Times New Roman, Georgia, Helvetica. Those are typefaces that you would find in Microsoft Word, Adobe Photoshop, Adobe Illustrator. Those are things that there's a specific name given to the style of a typeface. Font is the variation of weights of a typeface. So even though these two are very closely related, they are somewhat different. So leading is an important factor in Photoshop or Microsoft Word or any kind of document that you'll use typeface. Leading controls the space between the lines of type, so the space between one line to another line, and that's super critical because sometimes the positive and negative space looks very awkward if you don't lead your typeface correctly. Kerning is the process of adjusting the space between characters in a proportional font, usually to achieve a visually pleasing result. If you look at the word logo there's a weird space between them, and so what you have to do is hit shift. So here we have kerning versus kerning. The first one is not kerned, the second one is. They use a space bar to separate those two awkward letters, the merging of the R and the N together. This is super important because sometimes you put something out there and the intention is not visibly seen because you maybe the process of adjusting the spacing between one character to the next. If you look at the kerning versus kerning, the first one's very tough to read. It's all smushed together. The letters almost merge to become a whole new letter. Sometimes this can be very offensive. You create a word that is supposed to be one thing and it comes off to be another, and it can be very awkward. So kerning is the adjustment of one letter to the next, that space, that visual space that makes the typeface work really well and not against your design. Here's an example of leading. Leading is the space between one line to the next, and this one becomes very, very smushed. Visually, it does not give the eyes enough of a break, so it's very difficult to read. And especially if you think about somebody who's younger or older, it's very tough to read that because they start merging it and they're just too congested. Here's an example of bad kerning where your message might get lost because the words kind of separate, and it's really hard for the viewer to put those words together in a quick way. So if you're driving by really quick and you see this on a billboard, your message might be totally lost on the viewer just because of poor kerning. Teaching text and typeface in Photoshop, people are always like, what does lorem ipsum mean? Because it shows up every time you try to add text. It's just gibberish. It's unintentional words because it's just showing you where your words will go. It's showing you what it would look like when you start typing. So it provides a placeholder text or dummy text or filler nonsense text to keep the place for your words. The anatomy of typography, there are many components to each letter. As you see on this T, it says terminal, X height, cap height, counter, baseline, bowl, descender line, the ear, the ascender line, serifs, the stem, and the ascender. Those are all parts of typography. It becomes a little bit more involved when you break down each letter with each typeface. There are two typefaces that designers love to hate. One of them is Comic Sans. This t-shirt is a legit t-shirt that they sell, and they sell bumper stickers. Designers everywhere cringe when they see Comic Sans in an advertisement, in a magazine spread, or in a logo. Equally as troubling is Papyrus. Papyrus has kind of a stylish look to it, but once it's transferred over to t-shirts, billboards, posters, the thinness of each letter really makes the typeface very insignificant. So please stay away from these two typefaces at all costs. Helvetica. It's the most common font ever. It looks good no matter what. Ultra light, thin, light, Roman, medium, bold, heavy, and black. If you're really in love with Helvetica, there's a 2-hour documentary that I actually watched. It's pretty good, but it is a very long one just on one font. There are people who actually go throughout their day. They have contests to see if they can go all day without seeing Helvetica anywhere in their life in one day, and I don't think many people can do it because it really is everywhere. So every typeface has to deal with three things: feelings, emotions, and associations. We want to relate to that font. The first one we have is sans serif. So if you look at each letter, they're nice, clean, they're really readable. They have a great attractiveness to it. It's really good for when choosing a typeface. Designers think of three things: feelings, emotions, and associations. So here we have a bunch of different types of typeface. The first one is a serif. If you look really close at the T, for example, you have these little pieces on the T that are called serifs, and they're little pieces, little decorative pieces that go onto each letter. So the T and the R, every which one of these letters in here has a little piece to it that hangs off of the letter, and that's called a serif. The opposite would be sans serif, something without a serif. So if you look at stability, you look at each letter, it's nice and clean and crisp. It doesn't have any decorative pieces to it at all. So the difference between serif and sans serif, if you can see it, are those little serifs, the little tags on each letter. Modern is a very clean, crisp one as well, but it can be italics, it can be bold, it can be thin, but they are really modern looking and really chic and clean. Display fonts are very decorative, fancy, very artistic, sometimes a little bit harder to read. They're awesome to grab someone's attention in a logo, but they should never be used for informational text. So if you wanted to grab someone's attention on the menu, you write the restaurant's logo in a really great typeface that's very clever and personalized, but then the informational text, the menu information, what's on each item would be something done in a serif or sans serif, something that's easily read. And then there's script, something that you'd traditionally find on like a wedding invitation, but although that has changed immensely, so it really doesn't fit that category solely anymore. Then we have Helvetica. Helvetica is the big winner. It's the most popular font or typeface ever because it can be ultra thin, light Roman, medium, bold, heavy, black, and it still looks good. There's a whole documentary based on this font. If you ever get really bored and want to watch it, it's on YouTube. It's a couple hours long, and it's very informative, and it really goes into depth of the Helvetica. It also talks about people who have contests to see how long they can go without running into the Helvetica typeface somewhere in their daily journey. Here are 10 best fonts for logo designs. These are some examples of something that work really well because they're readable, but they're also creative and they're also stylized and personal to that company. However, like we mentioned before, they should not be used for informational fonts or typefaces. That's really strictly to grab your attention. Here are two ads that really use clean, crisp fonts. There's nothing decorative about them. This one is Nivea Night Cream. Obviously, they're forming a little crescent moon out of the placement of the container. But if you look at the font, the first one is nice and clean. The second one is italics, but it's a font that is very legible no matter what your age, or no matter if you have your glasses on or not. You can probably see those letters and you know what it's forming. Here's an ad for some strongermarriage.org. They're saying cut the M, turn it around, and it becomes we. So it says how to build a lasting relationship. They're not relying on imagery here at all, just solely typeface to sell you their product, which is actually a service in this ad. But if you look at it, it's nice and clean and crisp, and it's very easy to read.